All right, I think we're good. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Yasmin Piper. I'm the events coordinator here at Spotlight PA. Thank you for spending your rather gloomy Thursday morning with us, but we're hoping that this conversation will brighten it up a little bit. So for those of you who are new to our programming, Spotlight PA is an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit newsroom producing investigative and public service journalism about state government and urgent statewide issues. And we couldn't do any of that work without you, our donors and readers who support us in numerous ways. You can learn more about us at our website, which is spotlightpa.org. So before we get started, I do want to say a few housekeeping items. Today's events will be recorded and posted on our website shortly for those who are not able to join us live. You can join today's discussion by submitting questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible towards the end of our program. And thank you in advance to those who already submitted questions for Liz. So today, someone who doesn't really need an introduction, but we're joined by the incredibly talented bestselling author Liz Moore. Moore is the author of many novels, including The God of the Woods, which was Amazon's #1 fiction pick of the year, and Long Bright River, which is on a slew of lists, including Barack Obama's favorite books of 2020, and is now a series on Peacock. So I have that book here, and we'll be digging into that today. Liz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. I am really happy to be here. Thanks for everybody who came out at this weird time of the day. I am in Rome right now and without much childcare, which explains why I'm in a bedroom and also why we're doing it at 4 p.m. my time. And what is it, 10 a.m. your time?
Yeah.
Thanks for being there at 10 a.m. on a Thursday.
Yes, we appreciate you all. I do want to say today is going to be a spoiler-free conversation. We're going to make sure everyone has a chance to read the book and see the series. Hopefully you do both. I know I have. But yeah, so just want to reiterate, like no spoilers. Um, so let's get started. So Long Bright River follows Mickey, who's a no-nonsense cop, and her sister Casey, who are kind of on opposite sides of Philly's opioid epidemic. So according to your interview with Philly Mag, Long White River was inspired by your years volunteering at an open drug market, which is a place where buying and selling drugs is done frequently and like out in the open. Um, what inspired your experience to write Long Bright River, and what was your experience in these open drug markets, and how did it influence you to write this book?
So the first experience I had in Kensington was actually writing nonfiction about it, and that was back in 2009, which is right after I moved to Philadelphia. I interviewed a number of people in the neighborhood, and sort of got their life stories, including a number of people who were either passing through the neighborhood or who were from the neighborhood. There were more along those lines then, who were experiencing active addiction and in some cases doing sex work to support their addiction. Um, I wrote a nonfiction essay about that for something called the Rust Belt Rising Almanac, which was published by a small press called The Head in the Hand, which is still operating as both a press and a bookstore in Kensington. Um, but following that experience and kind of in combination with my own long family history of addiction, um, I began to conceive of the characters of Mickey and Casey, and I initially wrote short stories about them that formed the seeds of the novel. I didn't actually volunteer per se in Kensington until after I was pretty well into the writing of the novel. So in 2018 and 2019, I volunteered at St. Francis Inn in Kensington, which is a longstanding, primarily food service organization, although they have a lot of other arms as well, including at that time the Thea Bowman Center, which is a women's day shelter, which is not operating out of St. Francis Inn these days. But at the time, it offered kind of a break to any woman who needed it, who wanted to get off the street for a bit. It offered food, computer use, laundry services, and it was there that I ran free monthly writing workshops for a time for any of the clients of Thea Bowman Center. And so that was because it came well into the writing of the book. I wouldn't say that that was like a necessarily inspiration for the book, but it certainly served to cement the neighborhood in my mind as a place that was really important to me and a meaningful place, a place where a lot of really wonderful people are doing their best to address issues that I think are have lots and lots of complex causes, many of which are kind of begin with the pharmaceutical companies that first falsely advertised prescription opioid medication as non-addictive. And I'll stop there, or else we'll go down that rabbit hole for a
Yeah,
very
let's
long time. But
next conversation.
yeah.
Yeah. So was there any reason why you wanted to make the main characters of the story two sisters?
Well, I have a sister. She is my only sibling, and we're very, very close. And I think, we have a much different kind of relationship than Mickey and Casey do, but at the heart of it is a incredibly strong bond forged in childhood. And that is the bond that Mickey and Casey also have. And I think although they're estranged at the start of the novel and the start of the series, it's the bond that keeps drawing them back to one another over and over. Um, and so yeah, that part of that was autobiographical, and part of that is it's a good uh, narrative device to have two characters who have shared history, because there are secrets in that history and there are some lies in that history, and that can really drive a plot.
Yeah, definitely agree. Um,
Mhm.
so while you were writing this book, how did you work on creating like because you have a lot of outside people who are from outside of Philly reading this book. How did you work on creating like a balanced view of Kensington that's like not too overly sensationalized, but not inaccurate?
Well, I think that's exactly right. When I first went to Kensington in 2009, it was not reported on in nearly the same way that it is today or more recently. In fact, it was a bit like underreported. I certainly people in the neighborhood understood what was happening. And of course, Kensington has a long history of being a place where different forms of drugs are bought and sold. Um, but what I also got really interested in reading about was Kensington's long history as a manufacturing community. And so I made my protagonist, the book is written in the first person from the point of view of Mickey. I made her herself have a really strong interest in history. In the book, she wanted to be a history teacher before life took her in a different direction. And so I was able to include a lot of information about Kensington as a neighborhood completely separately from its current, the way it is currently sensationalized in the media. And I hope that that served to kind of create a more well-rounded portrait of the neighborhood as a place also with a really fascinating history, as a place where there are a lot of families just living and working and, going about their lives. And my hope always when I write about addiction, because it's a theme that comes up in a lot of my books, not just Long Bright River, to portray addiction in a way that feels respectful, and as a medical disorder, which for all intents and purposes it is. I think moralizing about addiction is not only, um I don't agree with doing that ethically, but also it's just not useful. It's not a useful way to think about addiction because when we paint it as a problem of morality or as like a failure of willpower, that doesn't help people recover. And so in Long Great River, Mickey, the protagonist, undergoes a kind of a change of heart where in the opening chapters of the novel, she's pretty judgmental about her sister, about addiction. She portrays herself as the sister who's always chosen right, and her sister Casey as the sister who's always chosen wrong. But one of the ways that I think she changes over the course of the novel is she's forced to reassess how she's always perceived herself and her sister. And yeah, my hope is that for anyone who thinks about addiction that in terms of ethics or morality rather than, I guess, a psychological and physical disorder, maybe this book can offer a different perspective.
Yeah. It was actually one of my favorite parts, like reading this book was seeing how Mickey changed and like just reevaluated the way she saw Casey and just the world around her, her community too, which it was my favorite part. So,
Thank you.
I'm curious, how long did it take you to write this book and how much was that was like dedicated towards just research?
So I think the short story I wrote about Mickey and Casey, in which Mickey was actually a school teacher, not a police officer, was back. I think I wrote that in 2012 or 2013. So in one way, the characters have really been living with me since that time. I began writing the book in earnest in about 2015 and had something close to a complete first draft in about 2018, and the book was published in 2020. So it's, like in one way, almost a decade, but in another way, I'm always at work on different projects. And so a book of mine called The Unseen World was published in 2016. So it wasn't really my focus. The Long Bright River wasn't really my focus primarily until the years like 2015 to 2018. And it always takes a year or two for a book to be published as well. So that's why it came out in 2020. But in terms of pure research, so much of it was just like almost incidental research, just from being in the neighborhood, from getting to know people who were doing community work in the neighborhood or longtime residents of the neighborhood or men and women living with addiction in the neighborhood. I didn't, I didn't have those conversations with an eye toward writing fiction about it. I was drawn to the neighborhood because I was drawn to the neighborhood. And I recognized people I know and love in many of the people that I met in Kensington as well. And some of those people became people that I now know and love and consider good friends. In terms of like research specifically for the novel, um, I did, as I said, I read a lot of books about the history of Kensington. One of them was called, I believe it was, I'm going to mess this up because I've just finished a book tour for a completely different book. So some of this is older history, but it was either Voices of Kensington or Faces of Kensington. I think it was Voices of Kensington, which was a really great oral history project. It was just a collection of interviews, first person kind of like stories, real stories told by primarily factory workers or people who had just experienced the closure of a factory during the um, period of deindustrialization that occurred in the States from the 70s to the 90s. Another was called, um, see, I should have prepped myself for these questions prior to this interview, but I think it was called Silk Stockings and something else. And it was about Kensington's rise as a manufacturing town or a manufacturing neighborhood. Um, and I also did one ride along with the Philadelphia police because once Mickey became a police officer, I needed to know the technicalities of what a police officer does from the beginning of a shift to the end of a shift.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to rely on just the research that I could do in books or online. I wanted to actually kind of like be in a patrol car and see what it feels like on the inside and see how the radio works and see, learn the names of the systems that are used and the daily schedule of a police officer. So that was intentional research that I did for the book that also served as helpful research for the series.
I'm curious. We'll talk about the series soon too. But I'm curious, what made you switch Mickey from being a history teacher to a police officer?
I think there were two things, and this was true for The God of the Woods as well. When writing any kind of book that deals with um, crime, for example, homicide in the case of Long Bright River, or the disappearance of two children in the case of The God of the Woods, you need somebody with access to the files, or else it's really hard to solve the crime. And so some of it is just the conventions of the genre. You need a character who can get in there and say, like, this is what's going on, this is what we know so far, this is the evidence that we have.
Hmm.
The other was, in thinking about Mickey and Casey, it became increasingly interesting to me from a story standpoint to have them be as opposite as possible. And so if Mickey was the very highly responsible one, the one who I self-identifies as somebody who's always chosen right, to give her the work of being a police officer also sort of felt right for her character. The complex thing about Mickey, and this comes out again, both the book and the series, is that she's not a very good police officer. A lot of her instincts are wrong. She constantly makes wrong guesses, and that's okay. Like I kind of liked the idea of somebody who was doing police work because it's what they thought they should do, or because somebody else told them it would be like a practical thing to do, that it has a strong union, good benefits. You don't have to finish college or university to get that job.
That thought process is very on brand for Mickey, the character.
Yeah, yeah. So it felt right for her character too. It felt better for her character to be somebody who maybe should have done something else, but ended up in police work, which is kind of how I always think of her. She's doing her best for sure, and she tries to do it like with dignity, but it's pretty clear that she's really not cut out for the job, and she's clear about that. I think in the opening chapter of the book, she describes herself as like weak, not the first officer to jump in front of a car, not the officer who's going to pursue on foot. She's she's really not cut from that cloth, but she's still trying to do a good job.
Yeah. So let's just dig into the series a little bit. So how did that process from book to TV series kind of start? Was it just like a phone call from someone? How did that start?
So the way it typically works is, if a book has gotten attention in the publishing community, uh, as in like the manuscript is attracting buzz. Often there are scouts that run it to Hollywood as a piece of intellectual property that producers might be interested in. And that's what happened with Long Bright River. So all the way back in like early 2018, actually, the rights, the screen rights were sold to Long Bright River, to Sony. And that was after a number of conversations that I had with a number of different producers, about the rights to the then manuscript, which was not a published book.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's how it got set up. And it was a long process of getting, like many books. It took, I guess, 7 years from the time it was first optioned in 2018 to the time it came out in 2025, for it to see the screen. But as part of that process, I was a co-creator, and a co-writer, and an executive producer. So I had, input along the way, and I co-wrote some of it, not all of it.
Did writing for TV kind of like shape your writing at all? How is that different from just writing a novel?
Well, um, for one thing, you have to be a lot more concise in a script. A television script tends to be about, for an hour, it tends to be between 50 and 55 pages, as opposed to 400, which is my
Yeah.
typical length for a book. And even on those pages, there's a lot of like blank space. And you really have to rely on strong dialogue and strong visuals to convey everything that you might otherwise be able to convey in paragraph form. So yeah, it's like in some ways it's a real exercise in showing, not telling,
Yeah,
if you're doing it right. Um, I guess you would think that I would now that I would start thinking about how to make my books more producible, by which I mean like I would not write books in which there are huge crowd scenes or parades or tons of flashbacks or whatever it is that makes a show hard to make. But I don't actually abide by that. I'm writing a book now and I never talk about my books in progress because I'm superstitious about it. But what I can say is that I am writing a ton of very hard to produce things in this book without any apology. So
good.
I guess it hasn't gotten to me in that way.
We'll worry about that later.
Yeah.
But I really love that you brought a lot of Philadelphia to the set. So you worked with Philly-born artists Timothy Curtis and Philly rapper OT The Real. Why was that
Mhm.
important to you to bring, these pieces of Philly to set and make sure it, feels authentic?
So first of all, I think authenticity just translates to quality. I think it's not, you know, for me, the actors and non-actors who came to set and the set dressers and the artists and the musicians who came to set were were doing us a favor. Although they were certainly, compensated for their work rather than the other way around. I think viewers can sense authenticity and reality, and even if they can sense at the same time that they're watching, for example, an untrained actor or a first time actor. I think there's something about it that feels that transcends acting ability and that I think lends I don't know, to just a sense of realness. And so a lot of our actors, we tried intentionally to cast from Philly's talent base, and to bring those actors to set. Some of them were trained Philly-based actors. Some of them were non-actors who got their SAG cards for the first time, uh, who had some skill or talent that they could offer to the series that went beyond just, acting in a scene. So um, OT the Real is a good example of that. He's certainly a performer, being a musician, but he had never acted before. And I think he was genuinely good. And I hope that he gets more work from it, for portraying the role of Doc.
Mhm.
Um, there were a couple of mummers on screen who were actual mummers from the Avalon String Band. And they also arranged and recorded a version of The Parting Glass for the series that was used in a funeral scene. And so the people you see singing that version of the song on screen are most of them are actual members of the Avalon String Band. And one of them is a Philly based singer named Jimmy Milligan, who's not in the Avalon String Band, but is a Philly based musician. Um, we we also cast there's a scene that takes place at Thanksgiving, um, in which we used a number of actors from Philadelphia and more specifically from Kensington, born and raised in Kensington, and let them improvise a little bit in a scene where the characters are all saying a prayer at Thanksgiving, which that was one of my favorite days on set, just because you could tell, like, for our actors that weren't from Philadelphia or Kensington, it was a chance to, I think, experience what the neighborhood was by kind of bringing the neighborhood to the series. And yes, I actually just noticed someone in the comments point out that Amanda Seyfried herself is from Allentown, Pennsylvania, and that was one of the things that we were excited about in casting her. Obviously, she's a really talented actress and a really wonderful person, I am happy to say. And we probably would have cast her no matter what, but it was a true bonus that she understood Philly culture. Her sister lived in Philadelphia for a long time, went to school in Philadelphia. So Amanda herself spent a lot of time in the city, and also, prior to the series.
Mhm.
And growing up in Allentown, obviously there's some cross-pollination between Allentown and Philadelphia. It's not so far removed. So she got it. Um, and John Doman, our actor who played G, was born and raised in Fishtown, Kensington line, and then moved up to Alney when he was older, and uh, went to high school in Philadelphia, went to Penn for college. So he's a true Philadelphian as well.
Yeah, I love that. Nothing excites me more than seeing someone on screen and just be like, they're from Pennsylvania. It's my favorite
Yeah, me
thing.
too.
So again, you mentioned the incredibly talented Amanda Seyfried,
Mhm,
and also Ashley Cummings, who plays Casey. How did you help
mhm,
them prepare for these very like intense roles?
mhm. So all of our lead actors who were not from this area came to Philadelphia to research and to meet with a lot of community members from Kensington. Uh, Amanda ended up doing a ride along herself to prepare for the role. Ashley came and volunteered with an organization called Savage Sisters. Many times and ended up having a kind of first informal and then formal dialect coach who is born and raised in Kensington, who was really, really helpful to her with her accent. Ashley's Australian. She was not raised in Australia, in Australia, but her parents are Australian, and so her natural accent sounds Australian. And she worked her butt off at the accent, and I think she did a good job. And that was in large part thanks to Sarah Laurel, who runs Savage Sisters, um, and also Justin Crawford, who ended up being Ashley's dialect coach, who she basically found herself just in the neighborhood. Um, yeah. So I think both actors have been on the record talking about how they too have like family experience that informs their roles. I don't want to talk for them, but if you're interested, you can probably Google a little bit and hear about what they brought naturally to those roles that informed them. But yeah, it was a really wonderful experience working with the actors because they cared and they still care. We had a really um, we had a great event in Philadelphia as part of the premiere of the series where we were able to invite all of our Philly-based cast and crew and artists and musicians and community on-set consultants. Sarah Laurel was one of our on-set consultants as well. Um, and and we had a panel featuring our on-set consultants along with some of our actors and musicians. And then we had a panel with our leads. And so that they got to again kind of like cross-pollinate and talk to one another. And that was my favorite event that we did for Long Bright River. It was really meaningful.
I love that. And I love how much they were actually like connecting with, local police and people in Kensington. It's a lot of on the ground like community work. That's really great.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I'm curious, did you take them to any of your favorite like Philly spots like you like to eat or just hang out?
Yes, I did. So I met Ashley a couple of times in Kensington, and I think where did we go? Funny, a lot, much of our hanging out was just at the community organizations so we went to House of Grace Catholic Workers Clinic. I am friends with Mary Beth and Johanna who run that, and we just kind of like hung out there and watched as they worked. Um, the first time that Amanda came to visit Philadelphia, we took her to Kalaya in Fishtown. So that was her Philly restaurant experience.
Nice. Uh,
Hmm.
okay, so don't want to get into again, no spoilers. But there are a few changes that you made from the book to the TV show. What was your thought process behind some of those changes?
Um, well, I guess first I'll start by naming like what the most obvious changes are, which won't be a spoiler. In the book, Mickey had ambitions to be a history teacher and ended up doing police work. In the series, Mickey had ambitions to be a music teacher or a musician and ended up being a police officer. One of the reasons that we made that change is because TV is such a visual medium. We felt like it would give her something to do that was more visually interesting than like reading history books. So it also felt like very particular to her character. She played the English horn in the series, which is such a weird, it's a beautiful instrument, but it's also like very highly specific and weird. And we thought it felt right for her character. At another point in the series, her friend Aura says she chose it just because she would always get to correct people who called it the French horn, which felt right for her character as well. Another big change we made is that G in the book is a grandmother and G in the series is a grandfather. And we did that partially because another visually interesting the thing that we thought we could include that would be visually interesting was the mummer culture in Philadelphia. And for that reason, it made more sense for G to have been a man. There are certainly women mummers now, and there have been for quite some time. But in his generation, it is much more likely that he would have been a man. And so we made him a man
Yeah.
and we gave him a parrot. There was no parrot in the book.
The parent and the almost called, is it the French horn? No,
It's the English horn.
the English
See, I
horn.
got to correct you. Yeah.
Yep, yep, thank you. Um,
Yeah.
my favorite changes. It's just like what? Why?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
now I know.
Just visual stuff, music stuff. Yeah. More to
So
do on screen.
yeah. So Long Bright River deals with a plethora of topics in addition to addiction. Talks about adolescence, the importance of community, single parenthood, like loving the wrong people, of course. Has there been any responses from readers or viewers after viewing or like reading the book, of course, that really stuck with you? Um,
Yeah, I get a lot of notes, very, very meaningful notes, often very sad notes, sometimes hopeful notes from people who have experienced addiction themselves, who have experienced the addiction of a family member or a friend, and in many cases who have experienced the loss of a loved one due to addiction. And those are very beautiful notes to receive. They're very difficult notes to receive. Um, I I love hearing from readers, and I always try. I I I can't write back to every note that I receive, but I've sort of made a rule for myself that to the best of my knowledge, I believe I have always written back to everybody up to about the age of 20. So I always really try to write back to young people who are writing to me, whether it's because they know somebody struggling with addiction or whether it's because they want to be a writer or whatever it is. Because I remember distinctly feeling like very alone at that age and also loving reading and writing a lot. And I think it's an act of bravery at that age to reach out to an author or really any public figure. And so I do try to respond to them.
that's beautiful. Um, are there any, we talked about this a bit, but are there any other parts of yourself? I know you talked about your sister and your family's history of addiction, but are there any other parts of yourself that you see in Long Bright River?
I mean, the city of Philadelphia has become home. It's not my native home. I've lived here. I'm in Rome. I've lived in Philadelphia for 16 years.
Mm.
My husband's family is from the Philadelphia area. Um, my kids are, I'm raising my kids in Philadelphia. Um, it's a city that really does feel like my home. And so it was really important to me to represent Philadelphia well, in a nuanced way and in a way that would run, I think, counter to a lot of the narratives you hear about Philadelphia, from people who don't live in Philadelphia. I guess that's that parts of that were autobiographical, little references to places that I go or have been or love. Um, uh, what else is in there? I don't know. I probably share some of Mickey's like more annoying characteristics, if I'm being honest. Um, I definitely share her love of history and reading about and reading in general and reading about neighborhoods and, learning the history of places. I get really into that.
Yeah. You can definitely feel how much you love Philadelphia in the book. Uh,
Thanks.
Again, me and my book club were reading this and just like pointing out some of the Philly spots. It was just like so
Mhm.
I don't know, out of body.
That's
See
cool.
the
Oh, here's one that it didn't make the cut for the series. Speaking of being unproducible, but there were a couple of Easter eggs about it. One of the scenes that I wrote in the book involves the girls going on a school field trip to the Nutcracker, and the whole class misbehaves and they basically get kicked out. And Mickey's devastated because she was something she was looking forward to. That is based on a real school field trip that I took in my youth. I think I was in middle school. I grew up in Framingham, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of Boston that is not, it's fairly working class. It's changed over the years. I have to be careful when I say this because my memories are, from over 20 years ago at this point. But when I was growing up, it was considered a kind of blue collar suburb. The middle school that I went to was underserved in a lot of ways. And for that reason, we were given the opportunity to go to a concert put on by the Boston Symphony Orchestra. And my classmates behaved so poorly that we too were kicked out. So that is based on a real episode from my childhood.
I love that. And it has to be
Yeah.
like a coming of age moment because in Harrisburg too, I
Hmm.
used to go every year to the Nutcracker and it inspired me to want to
Hmm.
be a ballerina for about a few
Amazing.
years
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
So this is our final question. And it's my favorite question. It was inspired by one of our readers, Jack S. So Jack
Hmm.
writes, what literary character or any author from any era would you like to hang out and have coffee with? But I'm going to tweak it just a little bit. So
Hmm.
now I'd like to know what three characters from Long Bright River would you want to sit down and have coffee with? And what would you say to them?
Um, okay. I would like, well, now I'm conflating the book and the series. I think, honestly, Casey in recovery or not, Casey at any point, I think is a kind person, a good person, somebody who would you could have a good, deep, profound conversation with. I think Casey would be one.
Yeah.
Um, when writing Thomas, the child character, Mickey's son in the book and series. I just wanted to like hug that kid a lot of the time. He did not have an easy time in life. And so I would love to just, take him out and do something fun, whatever he wanted to do. Um, I guess Truman would be my third. I'm not naming Mickey because she's too close to me and I don't need to hang out with myself. Truman, I think, is someone who, it's hard to say this without spoiling anything. He has his own character arc in the book that involves, I think he's a good person who suffers from like kind of a codependency. Like he's an elder sibling. He's a caretaker of his entire but like family of origin. And um I think Truman needs to be able to say no to people more. And again, I don't want to spoil anything, but I think part of his arc is like learning to say no. And so with Truman too, I would be like, Truman, what would you like to do today? Let's do something that you would like to do.
I also feel like Truman can give some great life advice, even if his isn't
Hmm.
the greatest. I feel like he can give
Hmm.
nice life advice.
Yeah, but he needs to be able to take a break from that. He needs to be like, I'm off the clock. I'm not giving any advice today. No, thank you.
Mhm. Yeah. I also think Paula would be a
Anyway,
great character
yeah,
too. I
it's
just
just funny.
me and her would just like
Hmm.
get along. Uh,
Hmm.
okay, so now we're going to transition into some audience questions. So if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. We're going to go through some ones we already have submitted. So this comes from Wendy M. She says it must have
Hmm.
been so difficult writing these experiences while writing the book. How did you kind of keep yourself on track?
I'm good at compartmentalizing, sometimes like out of necessity, but I'm a morning writer, again, out of necessity because I have small children still. So I get up um, at home in Philly. I get up about 5:30 and I write from about 5:30 to 7:30 or 8. My husband gets up with the kids and I like take over in and get them to school. And therefore, like those are my hours to feel all the emotions and to struggle with my writing and um, kind of like hit my head against a wall if I'm having a bad writing day. And then for the rest of my day, I put it aside and I really don't return to it. I have a lot of other work at all times. I am the director of Temple's MFA program in creative writing. And so I have my teaching work, I have my family life. At any given moment, I'm often working on multiple writing projects. So I work on everything aside from fiction. But yeah, I guess my answer is I just compartmentalize it and I do it first thing in the morning and then I'm done. And I try not to let it I try to live my life with a pretty strong boundary between fiction and reality.
Yeah. Well, then,
And I will say also another way to deal with that is to to be useful in some way or to be proactive in some way. And so for me, like either volunteering as I have done or supporting community organizations that deal with like what I'm writing about feels more productive than just like feeling bad about it or feeling sad. So I always like to shout out the organizations that I love and work with, and one of them, of course, is St. Francis Inn. One of them is the Catholic Workers Free Healthcare Clinic. Another is Savage Sisters, and Savage was the organization that we partnered with to do with, well, Sarah Laurel, its founder and director, was our on-set consultant, but they do really, really good life-saving work in Kensington and elsewhere, actually. They have a number of recovery homes around Philadelphia and outside of Philadelphia. And so, yeah, look into them. They are a great Kensington-based organization that can always use extra help as well.
nice. I have a follow-up to that. So it must have
Mm.
been I mean they're professional actors, but it must have been a little bit difficult for the actors to kind of um get into these roles that are very based on addiction and things like that. Were there any on-set support for them, or how did they deal with all these emotions that might come up for them?
Yeah, some of that is, one of the things that I was very green. I had worked on other adaptations of my books, but just from a writing standpoint, and they never got made. So the actual production part of a series was brand new to me. And so I was learning on the job. But one of the things that's kind of amazing about television work is how strong our unions are. And so um all of the actors are in a union that provide, regular like healthcare, mental health care, everything like that. Writers are too, producers are too. Set builders are, set dressers, everybody's got a union. And one of the other things that we made sure to do was to have community representation on set, whether it was Sarah or whether it was we had actually one of the Franciscan brothers at St. Francis Inn came on to play a small role as a priest, and that was a meaningful day on set too. I think everybody sort of felt his presence, whether or not they were religious, as a kind of, I don't know, it was just a moving day, the day that he was there. Um, I think one of the most important ways to foster a positive experience for people on set is um, to kind of lead with open communication. I was not the showrunner of the series. Nikki Toscano was the showrunner of the series, but from very early on, we had conversations about what our kind of set of ethics was when it came to portraying really difficult subjects, um, what sort of atmosphere we hope to foster on set, and how to make sure that everybody was talking about difficult issues like addiction or being the family member of someone with addiction in a way that made space for everybody's emotions about the subject. And so I'm happy to say that it seems to me like people had a good experience on set as far as those things were concerned.
Um, so the next question comes from Luann P. She asks, were you satisfied with the TV adaptation of Long Bright River, or were there some things that you would like to change, if you could?
That's a hard question to answer because I was involved with the creation of it. Uh, you know, I might have a different answer if I just sold the rights to it and somebody else made it. What I'll say in answer to that is, like, everything is a team effort. And so anybody who works on the project, I think, will feel like, oh, I might have done that differently, or I might have, or I'm really happy with that scene. That's just kind of like a natural human reaction. Um, I will say it's something I'm proud of, both the process of making it. I think we did that in a very thoughtful way. And it's hard to look at it now without having a very intimate understanding of what everybody in a scene was doing on that day, and all of the work that went into, you know, every actor's job, but also like all of the sets were made so thoughtfully and with so much research. I'm not a good arbiter of the series. I can't be the judge of the series, weirdly, because I was there and because I was involved in it. And because I, like, ultimately care a lot about the people who made it and who contributed to it. Um, so yeah, I think it's better. I fully want everybody to have their own opinions of the series, to talk about it in your book clubs, to talk about it with one another, but maybe I can't be part of the conversation. I have to recuse myself.
That's fair. That's fair. Plead the
Yeah.
fifth. Um, so this one comes from Andrea W. She
Mhm.
asks, how has the neighborhood Kensington changed since you wrote the book and since the series has been streamed?
So a couple of things. When I first arrived in Kensington, there were fewer people passing through the neighborhood and more people who were longtime residents of the neighborhood, like the children, children, adults who had grown up in Kensington and who now were experiencing addiction, and sometimes living on and off the streets of Kensington. Today, many of the people that you meet in Kensington actually who are experiencing addiction were actually raised outside the city, either in the suburbs. A lot of people are coming in from Bucks County, or even elsewhere in the country, and they come to Kensington. Uh, Another thing is that, oh, the pandemic really altered the neighborhood in terms of the resources that people were able to offer in Kensington. And so for a time during the pandemic, the rates of people living without houses skyrocketed, and you would see many more people on the streets than you did just before the pandemic began. Obviously, the type of what is contained within the drugs that people are injecting has changed dramatically since I first went to Kensington. So you've probably at this point heard of xylazine. Even that is being phased out, only to be replaced with another synthetic tranquilizer that has wrought havoc on people's health. There's very little what is contained within the substances now available in Kensington, very little of it is actually opioid medication at this point. A lot of it is tranquilizers of various kinds. Um, Even fentanyl, like there was a huge scare about fentanyl uh, for a long time. Even fentanyl is sort of being phased out in favor of tranquilizers instead, which the tranquilizers themselves can be just as detrimental in different ways to users of injectable medication, of injectable narcotics. Um, what else? Well, obviously, there's been a lot of focus on Kensington and energy pointed at Kensington from the current mayoral administration. Whether or not that has yielded the correct results is another story. There are many more kind of like sweeps of Kensington, but I've heard a lot of people on the ground in Kensington describe that as this is a quote that I think is um, really specific and accurate. It's sort of like a downstream solution to an upstream problem. The problem is not the unhoused people using injectables in plain sight on the street. That is a symptom of the problem, but the problem begins much higher up the stream, let's say.
Um, that flows well into our next question from Jeffrey C. Where does the local media fail in its coverage of Kensington?
Hmm. I don't actually know that I feel equipped to answer that. I guess I'm allowed to say that. I can tell you like the national media certainly fails in its coverage of Kensington because I think um, Kensington is often used as a shorthand um, or like urban decay in a really, really oversimplified way that neglects all the complexities of a neighborhood like Kensington and all of the like good things that are happening in Kensington too, which are plentiful. But I don't know. I don't know. I actually am curious, Yasmin, if you feel like you want to answer that question.
I think we could talk about that off air. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
but there's another great question from Beth B. Was there any
Hmm.
reaction from Philly police about how you portrayed the police?
If there was, it did not reach me.
Okay. Um, from Bud H. What are three things that you could be done to improve the quality of life for people in Kensington?
Um, Unfortunately, here too, a lot of the solutions I think on the local level are actually um, national issues. So obviously, better access to better healthcare is probably the number one thing that could be done to improve the situation in Kensington. Better community police relations is another thing that could be done to improve the situation in Kensington. Um, yeah, I mean, I'll stop there.
Let's see here. So now this one you don't have to share if you don't want to, but I'm just going to ask it anyway. What was your own experience with your family and addiction, and was any of it associated with Kensington? That's from Susan W. or Susan M.
I appreciate the question. I know where it comes from. I think people are very naturally curious about autobiography. But my boundary is basically I don't tell other people's stories aloud. And those, although they are the stories of my loved ones, they're not my stories to tell. And that is right why I write fiction, conveniently for everyone.
I love that answer. Um,
Mhm.
so we're about on time here, or out of time here. So I do want to go back to that Jack S question, which is like which literary figure from any era would you want to have coffee with? And what would you say to them? And what do you think they will think of your books?
Literary figure from any era. I would like, hmm. All right. I'm a big Edith Wharton fan, and there's a character of hers from a book, The Custom of the Country, called the character's name is Undine Spragg, and she is terrible in a good way. She's sort of like the same instinct impulse we have to watch reality television. Wharton wrote Undine Spragg with some of those same instincts in mind. I think I would like to have coffee with her just to kind of like watch her in action. In a, and that is an instinct that doesn't come from a noble place, but I don't know. I'm a big people watcher. I think she'd be fun to watch for a while.
Philly is a great place to people watch.
Yeah,
You're in the right
it
area.
really is. It is. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you again, Liz, for joining us. Is there anything else that you want to plug or anything else you would like to say to our readers who are all based in PA mostly?
Um, what do I want to plug? I guess just the show. Watch the show. It's on Peacock, which is somewhat Philly specific because it's a Comcast entity, and Peacock does not have quite the same viewership as your Netflix, for example, or your Hulu. So if you haven't watched the series yet, give the series a watch, see if you like it. That's my plug.
Nice. And I believe Peacock is
Look,
free too. I have Peacock, just some
well,
ads, which is fine.
you could. Yeah, I was gonna say there is a free version, but you will have to sit through some ads.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, thank you again so much for joining us and
yeah.
for everyone who attended today on again, on this Thursday morning. Um, you can find more of Liz's books at lizmore.net. We encourage you to buy all her books and buy local and support your local libraries specifically. Um, and yeah, that's everything. You can see this event on spotlightpa.org. It should be up shortly. Again, excited to have you here, Liz. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Yasmin. Great questions. Thanks to everybody for coming and for your questions too. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Have a great rest of
All
your
right.
day.
Thank you. Bye.